Hello and greetings. This is Craig Crawshaw from Oaks Bible Church, pastor, and we're going through 1 Corinthians 15, the resurrection chapter of the Bible. This is the sixth podcast on that great chapter, the resurrection chapter of the Bible. Last time, in the fifth installment, we talked about the three feasts of the Jews, the first of the three feasts, and how they correspond to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You remember we talked about the Passover feast corresponding to Jesus' death, he being the Passover lamb, and we talked about unleavened bread, that the sinless, yeastless bread that corresponded to the sinless man of God, who was put into the grave in haste as the bread was eaten in haste. And then we talked briefly about the fact that resurrection corresponds to the Feast of First Fruits, just mentioning that it did. And we're not going to go into that anymore right now, but as we look ahead in 1 Corinthians, we'll be talking more about that Feast of First Fruits. So hang on to that idea. But today I wanted to take you to the verse 5, where Paul starts to talk about the tremendous corroboration of this miracle of resurrection. Do you realize how well substantiated and corroborated with evidence this resurrection was? Not just by one or two or a few, but by hundreds. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 5, "And he appeared to Cephas," that would be the Apostle Peter, "then to the 12, that would be his 12 disciples." Now Judas would have been dead at that time, but Matthias had taken over his place, so there was 12. "After that he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time." Amazing. We know nowhere else in Scripture where it says this, but Paul says it would probably happen in Galilee when he went up to the northern region of Israel, where he had many people that would have known him. But 500 at once, think of that. That's corroboration. Most of whom remain until now, which means at the time of Paul, most were still alive, and you could go talk with them. You could ring on their doorbell, as it were, and say, "Hey, did you see Jesus?" And they'd say, "Yes, he was alive after his death." But some have fallen asleep, some had died at this point, but 500. "Then he appeared to James," it says in verse 7. Now that would probably not be referring to James the disciple, but James the brother of Jesus, who wrote the book of James and who became the head of the church of God in the early church, as it says in Acts chapter 15. We read about him and other places. "And to all the apostles," which would include then others that were eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ, who were his followers from the beginning. Notice who's left out in this list. He doesn't mention any women. And we know that Mary Magdalene saw him. We know that Johannes and Mary, the mother of James, saw him. Others are mentioned in the gospel accounts. But apparently Paul wanted to particularly mention the apostles, to particularly mention the importance of those who would be writing the New Testament. If anyone would be credible to the readers and the listeners of what he had to say, it would be those who had seen Jesus firsthand, who'd walked with him, who talked with him, who had been his chosen men of God. That's why he says Peter, Cephas, all the apostles, and James. But I just want to reiterate to you again the amazing truth that 500 at once saw him. If you can believe the report, if you can believe the Bible as being a truthful account, and that Paul said it truthfully, 500, and at one time. How many things are corroborated by 500 witnesses at the same time? Do you believe in the resurrection? Are you convinced that Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, bodily came out of that grave and walked around in a resurrection body for 40 days before he ascended. That is a critical part of your faith and of the Christian belief. And I encourage you to investigate those claims of resurrection as we continue with these podcasts on 1 Corinthians 15. Come back. God bless you.